standards are, but you would think that California would be closer to the cutting edge. This was far behind the cutting edge. And those responsibilities made it very difficult to show with any certainty to the insurance company or to a court or anyone else exactly what the cause of death here was.
What troubled Keeney were the photographs taken of Donna shortly before her death. They told a story that was much different from the McGinnis's account.
At the waters below. Mr. McGinnis is behind the victim. The victim is a few feet from the edge of the cliff. Mr. McGinnis' left hand is on the victim's left shoulder.
Investigators thought BJ's position was extremely suspicious.
The only reason he's looking to the right is, we would speculate to look for vehicles, see if anyone can see. And that's the last photograph taken of her alive.
It's almost as though she's in motion then, and the husband's hands up against Donna's shoulder.
And the last 4 pictures were even more unusual.
I think those 4 photos are surveillance pictures. I think that was Virginia McGinnis looking through the viewfinder of her camera to make sure nobody saw what they did.
They're not photographs the tourist is going to take, and particularly the fact that the sequence, to this day, I don't understand why they were taken.
There's a shot looking down the cliff where Donna fell. Then, 3 panoramic views, one to the left, another to the right, and the last behind them.
Now, if she has slipped and fallen, then who's taking sightseeing photographs? I mean, who cares about a camera? Let's see if we can save her.
That film says they saw her when she fell off the cliff, and they kept taking pictures.
Investigators now suspected that B.J. McGinnis deliberately pushed Donna over the cliff to her death. But what was the motive?
Thanks.
Investigators wanted to know why Donna Hartman looked so alert and vivacious in pictures taken earlier on the day she died, but later on that day she seemed drowsy and disoriented.
The circumstances that we had indicated a homicide, not an accidental death. And our job was to prove it or disprove it. We had virtually no evidence.
Donna's autopsy was fairly routine, and the toxicology tests were routine as well.
I would characterize the autopsy as meeting minimal professional standards. If I had to object, it would be that it appeared that the possibility that foul play was really not taken into account. So that extra measure perhaps was not done in this case.
The doctor who performed the autopsy was not a forensic pathologist, but he did something virtually unheard of at the time. For reasons not entirely clear, he kept a vial of Donna's blood in refrigerated storage, and 2 years after her death, it was sent to the forensic lab for testing.
The dose of Elavil is determinative. A tiny dose may have little or no effect. A large dose can be so disorienting that you're drowsy. You may even fall asleep standing on your feet. At the very least, you won't be alert.
investigators discovered Donna and the McGinnises had lunch about 2 hours before she died. The waiter who served them said that Donna ordered a soft drink.
It's anyone's guess, but if I had to speculate, I would say that at that point they put the Advil in her Coke, but it's speculation.
But there was no way to prove it. So investigators turned to another set of pictures, the ones taken during Donna's autopsy. They were analyzed by forensic pathologist Dr. Barbara Weekly-Jones. She noticed two things which were barely mentioned in the original autopsy: wounds on the back of Donna's hands, but not on her palms, and her fingernails were broken.
She's up like this, and she's grabbing hold of the edge, the nails will break off. Well, the same, you should have then abrasions on the palmar surface of your hands as you're going down, and she did not have that. All of her injuries are on the back of the hands.
Why would someone who slid down a cliff have bruises on the backs of her hands, but virtually no marks on her palms? Dr. Weekly-Jones said it was impossible to be sure, but that she had a theory.
I think that she was pushed off the cliff and didn't make it, and her hands were stomped on in order to get her to continue her fall off the cliff. But the injuries on her hands were more consistent with a struggle or that scenario than a simple fall off the cliff.
This was a harrowing possibility. It meant that while Donna was hanging onto the cliff's edge, one or both of the McGinnises sent her to a certain death.
There was no what we call pattern injury to help determine as to what she was struck with. She could have been struck with a fist, for all I know, or she could have been struck with an instrument.
These were the wounds of someone who was fending off an attack and then died, as opposed to somebody who flopped down a cliff and had some things break along the way.
Like accidents. In previous years, Virginia McGinnis had written,
people don't misspell their own names when they sign their names, so that's a red flag to the document examiner, to the prosecutor, to anyone involved in the case.
Alice Cassane's signature did not match her known signature samples, and it had an unusual backward slant.
Backhand slanting isn't necessarily an evidence of forgery, but it is evidence of someone trying to change the way they write.
With a court order, investigators forced Virginia McGinnis to provide a handwriting sample.
I asked her to write Alice Cassane's name first in her own natural handwriting, and then I asked her to write it in a backhand slant because that's how it appeared on the question document.
Forensic document examiners concluded Virginia McGinnis had signed Alice Cassane's name on the insurance policy.
It was not any different from her handwriting. She merely had changed the slant in order to disguise her writing and make it indistinguishable from the rest of the writing on the form.
Why did she take what was perhaps the most incriminating photo of all? A photograph of Donna just before she was pushed over the cliff.
I think Virginia wanted a souvenir. I think Virginia wanted to revisit the death of Donna and enjoy it over and over again. I think she believed that by having that picture, she would have something that would arouse in her the same excitement and the same violation of rules that she had felt live on the cliff when Donna died.
Virginia had apparently picked Donna as an ideal victim. Just as Donna was separating from her husband, Virginia befriended her. Donna was vulnerable and an easy mark for an experienced con artist like Virginia.
She was absolutely a perfect victim because she was young, relatively uneducated, unsophisticated, far from her home. Her husband was far away from her. Impressionable. She trusted everyone, would not ask questions.
Donna fell into a spider web and became what I guess you'd call today a target of opportunity.
52-year-old B.J. McGinnis
houses, and she would be collecting insurance with your premiums.
haunted by the mysterious disappearance of her mother, a young woman set out on a personal quest for answers. 20 years after the initial investigation, in some old bones, she found evidence of a deep, dark family secret, a hint of what really happened to her mother. Verona, Kentucky, population 500. The center of town features a four-way stop, a one-room city hall, and Mr. Herb's, a popular restaurant where the locals gather for its famous fried fish. In a town this size, word spread quickly when 25-year-old Marlene Major, the mother of two young children, was reported missing. Her husband Bill said she just got into her car and drove away.
He admitted they had an argument Saturday evening, and she was mad at him. He acted all upset, said he had spent the whole night driving here and there looking for Marlene.
Bill and Marlene Major had been married for 9 years. They appeared to be a traditional couple, but their marriage wasn't the least bit conventional. Bill wasn't Marlene's only love interest. She was having an affair with Glenn St. Hilaire, a man who worked for Marlene's husband and lived in a trailer on their property.
As time went on, Glenn and Bill's wife, Marlene, became closer friends, and actually romance started between the two of them.
Bill not only knew about the affair, he encouraged it.
I felt that Bill was actually using Glenn to get close to Marlene, because I don't think Bill's interest was in Marlene at all.
And there were rumors that Bill also had a girlfriend on the side. When questioned by police, both her husband Bill and Glenn St. Hilaire denied any involvement in Marlene's disappearance and said they didn't know where she went. Marlene's children, 8-year-old Donald and 4-year-old Lalana, were in bed when Marlene left, and they heard nothing out of the ordinary. Marlene's car was missing too, but she left without taking any personal items.
She went to the doctor like the week before and had gotten a prescription allergy medication. That was there. All of her jewelry was there. She didn't have her driver's license, her social security card. She had nothing with her.
Police found no evidence of a struggle either in Marlene's home or in Glenn St. Hilaire's trailer.
It was literally like she had just completely dropped off the face of the earth. Gone. Poof.
Maybe she decided, the heck with the whole thing, I'll go start a new life someplace else.
Lalana and her brother Donald grew up believing their mother had abandoned them. Making things worse, their father became increasingly abusive.
I've seen him beat my brother to the point Donald could not pick himself up off the floor. You know, you would miss school because you had bruises.
Finally, when the children could take it no longer, they confided to their new stepmother that their father was sexually abusing both of them and had also threatened them.
To keep me and my brother in line when we were kids, it was, if you don't do what I tell you to, if you don't cooperate, I will kill your brother. You know, and would turn around and tell my brother, if you don't do what I tell you to, if you don't cooperate, I will kill your sister.
Bill's new wife called police and had him arrested for first-degree sexual assault.
We're peeking around the corner, and he looked down the hallway at us. And I mean, just the look in his eyes. And I just sat there and I said to myself, I hope they keep him. I pray to God that they keep him. Because if they don't keep him, we're as good as dead.
Bill Major was convicted and sentenced to 15 years in prison. 9-year-old Lalana and 13-year-old Donald moved back to Kentucky to live with their maternal grandmother. And by now, Lalana was old enough to ask her grandmother about something that had always haunted her.
We were sitting in the parking lot in front of a department store, and I said, well, do you know where my mother is? You know, have you seen her? Have you heard from her? It was just like 10 seconds of absolute silence. And she looked at me, she said, honey, she said, your mother's dead. She said, she's been dead. She said, your father killed her.
But Lalana's grandmother had no proof, only her brother Donald.
I went to get Donald up for school and caught Bill with him. He tried to hide what they were doing, but I know what I saw. I guess I died inside. I told him not to touch me ever again, and if he ever touched Donald, I'll kill him. He wants me to help him, and I don't know what to do.
Marlene couldn't even tell that horrific secret to her own family, but she did record it in her diary. Not in specific detail, but enough that you know what she's talking about.
Lalana also found evidence that her mother was considering divorce.
I have something on him. He'll sign the papers and won't open his mouth. If he does, I'd go to his mom. Just take my word for it, he won't. He died before he'd let his mom find out what I have on him. Did he murder someone? No, worse. Let's put it this way. I could be the biggest whore that ever walked the streets of Verona, and no judge in the country would give him custody of my kids over me.
He knew that if she left, she would tell someone eventually, and he would end up going to prison for it. You know, which obviously he did not want.
To find out more, Lalana interviewed everyone she could find who had known her mother.
I got a composition notebook, cost me like 99 cents at Walmart, and if I talked to somebody, I wrote the date, the time, and what the conversation was over.
And everyone said the same thing, including Glenn St. Hilaire, her mother's boyfriend.
Glenn told me about something my father had said, and he had made the statement that if my mother had ever tried to leave him and take us, that he would kill her, and that he knew how to commit the perfect crime.
He told several people that he would cut her head off, knock her teeth out with the butt of the gun after he shot her in the head, and then he would remove her jaw, and cut her up in little pieces and spread her throughout the state.
And Lalana discovered something else. 1 year after her mother's disappearance, a hunter had found a human skull in a rural tract of land just a mile from her home. The bone was too badly degraded for DNA analysis, and there were no teeth or jaw, so dental comparisons were impossible too. But Lalana was convinced this was her mother's skull.
It's one thing having a murder case where you have no suspect and you just have to let it go. But when you feel 100% sure you know who murdered your victim and you just can't do anything about it, it's a hopeless feeling.
Almost 20 years later, Lalana searched the area herself, going so far as to dig in nearby sinkholes. She, too, was unsuccessful.
I was really, 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 really hoping to find something. Because I was like, if I could find something, if I could, that would be something more than we have now. If I could find the rest of her body. But at the same time, it was constant terror that I would find something.
Despite her frustration, Lalana soon learned that new forensic testing might be able to identify the mysterious skull, which for the past 20 years had been kept in the medical examiner's office.
This is our hope. This is our chance.
Marlene Major's daughter, Lalana, strongly suspected that a skull found in 1981 was her mother's.
There was no face, there was no jaw. It was just the top of the skull that had a distinct bullet hole right in the top of it.
The medical examiner determined that the fatal bullet entered her face and came out through the top of her skull. 3 types of weapons could have caused an injury this size. One was a 9mm pistol, the same type of weapon Bill Major carried. A forensic anthropologist concluded the skull was that of a Caucasian female approximately 30 years old.
The female characteristics on the skull that we could see were the lack of a brow ridge. Most males have a heavy ridge right here across their brow, and this particular skull did not.
And there was evidence that someone deliberately tried to prevent an identification.
At the base of the skull, where the jaw inserted, there were small cut marks where it appeared as if someone had deliberately tried to sever the ligaments that attached the jaw to the rest of the skull.
But 20 years had passed since Marlene Major disappeared. And during that time, scientists found a way to extract DNA from fossils tens of thousands of years old. It wasn't DNA from the cell's nucleus, but the mitochondria that live outside the nucleus, which are more plentiful and easier to analyze. But mitochondrial DNA is passed to children only from the mother, so it limits the amount of information. Marlene Major's relatives were willing to pay for this new DNA test themselves, at the time almost $20,000.
One of the hardest things that I ever heard was that one of the sisters of Marlene Major actually was trying to cash in her in retirement to see if she would be able to pay for this DNA testing.
When my aunt told me that she was going to pay for the DNA test, I'm like, they can't do DNA. And she's like, yes, they can. There is some kind of test that they can do. So I went on the internet and started looking up on DNA and found out about the mitochondrial DNA.
Officials in Kentucky eventually rethought their position and decided to pay for this new DNA test available through LabCorp in North Carolina. A tiny bone fragment was frozen with liquid nitrogen, crushed into a fine powder, and placed into a vial with a DNA extraction buffer. The sample was then amplified, creating millions of copies of the DNA, so there was a sufficient amount to be tested. Technicians then used a computer to compare the mitochondrial DNA sequences of the skull to that found in Lalana's saliva.
We're looking at 700 bases, and it would be hard for the human eye to line up all 700 bases. So the majority of the interpretation of the sequencing is done by computers.
Since mitochondrial DNA is passed maternally, Marlene Major and her 2 children would all have the same mitochondrial DNA profile. When the DNA from the skull was compared to Lalana's DNA, it was an exact match.
I felt like taking out a full-page ad in the Garrett County newspapers and saying, okay, look, DNA test back positive, Marlene Oaks is dead. Okay, she didn't walk out and leave her kids, she's dead. She was murdered.
20 years after Marlene Major's skull was found, science proved her identity. Her diaries had suggested motive, and Marlene's daughter Lalana was determined to bring her father to justice.
20 years later, we would be able to solve it with just a very small piece of material from that skull.
Bill's own father put the last piece of the puzzle in place. He said Bill confessed to the murder during a conversation the two of them had 5 years earlier.
For a man to kill his wife, to him, was appalling. And from that day forward, he pretty well disowned his son. He didn't want a thing to do with him.
Bill's father gave police this information at the time, but without any hard evidence, the information was useless.
In Kentucky, we have a rule that says that a defendant's statements are not enough. You have to have something to corroborate a defendant's statements. And, from 96 until 2001, all we had was the statement.
Bill's father once again offered to help in any way he could.
I asked him if he would mind us coming up to Nova Scotia, putting a recorder on his phone, and then he would contact his son in Massachusetts, and he agreed to.
Sure enough, Bill incriminated himself.
I keep getting calls from Lalana, and she wants to know where her mother is so that she can get the bones and put them in a casket and have closure.
Yeah, and put me in jail for life.
You have pulled off the perfect crime, haven't you?
No, I wouldn't call it perfect.
No.
Because if a crime was perfect, nobody would ever know about it.
Bill Major was arrested and charged with Marlene's murder. During extradition to Kentucky, he confessed to the local sheriff.
He said, killing that girl meant nothing to me. It'd be like me getting up every morning tying my shoes. That's what it meant to me.
She would have been taking his get toys, I guess is how you would phrase it, or because his children were more than children to him.
Ultimately, she died to protect us. She was trying to get us away from him and to get us out of that situation, okay? She was trying to protect her children.
Major admitted pushing his wife's car into the Ohio River and burying her body in a sinkhole. But neither the car nor the rest of her remains have ever been recovered.
We dug out this sinkhole. This sinkhole just seemed to be endless. We dug out as far as we could with a backhoe, but nothing was found. And again, the river, with the flooding and the speed of the river during times, there's no telling where that car's at.
Current is so strong and the years were so many that the chances of finding that car was like looking for a needle in a haystack.
It took the jury only 4.
The ability to identify partial human remains after that length of time is totally amazing. And if it were not for the advances in DNA science, this still would be impossible.
Science is definitely smarter than the criminals. Criminals today may know what we can do with science, but nobody knows what we're going to do tomorrow.
The rain had stopped before dawn, but the road was still shining when police found the abandoned car. The driver's door was open. The interior light was on. A coat was hanging from the back seat, and on the passenger floor was a single photograph, a young woman, smiling, 23 years old. Her name was Claire Bennett. She had disappeared from a quiet New Jersey town on November 14th, Sill, 1985. For decades, investigators believed they were looking at a missing person case. Then they found the photograph, and everything changed. Claire had left work at 6:12 p.m. She was supposed to meet a friend for dinner. She never arrived. At 8:47 p.m., her mother called police. By midnight, officers were searching the roads around the town. At 4:16 a.m., a patrol officer found Claire's car beside an abandoned service road near the Passaic River. The engine was off. The driver's door was unlocked. Her purse was inside. Her wallet was inside. Her keys were gone. Claire was gone. There was no obvious sign of a struggle. No blood. No weapon. No witness. Just an empty car sitting beneath a broken streetlight. The first theory was simple. Claire had left voluntarily. Maybe she had met someone. Maybe she wanted to disappear. Maybe she had been upset. But her mother rejected that theory immediately. Claire had left her dinner reservation untouched. She had not taken extra clothes. She had not withdrawn money. She had not contacted anyone. and she had promised to call home after dinner. She never did. The next morning, search teams moved through the surrounding woods. Dogs followed a scent from the car. The trail disappeared near the river. Divers searched the water. Nothing. Police questioned Claire's co-workers. One co-worker remembered something strange. Claire had been frightened during her final week at work. She had received several telephone calls. Whenever the phone rang, Claire would leave the room. She refused to discuss them. One co-worker finally asked who was calling. Claire reportedly answered, "Someone who doesn't want me talking." That sentence became the first real clue, but nobody knew what it meant. Claire worked as an accounts clerk for a construction supplier. Her job was routine. Invoices, payroll, purchase orders, checks. Nothing dangerous. Until detectives examined her desk. Inside was a notebook. Most pages contained ordinary calculations. Then investigators found a list of payments. Several amounts were circled. Next to them, Claire had written one word, missing. A second page contained company names. A third contained initials, JM, R8, and one name written in full, Thomas Vale. Vale was a contractor who frequently did business with Claire's employer. He was 41. Married. Well known in town. No criminal record. No obvious connection to Claire outside work. When police questioned him, he appeared calm. He said Claire had handled some of his invoices. He said she was professional. He denied having any personal relationship with her. He also denied calling her. The detectives had no reason to believe otherwise. There was no phone record. No witness. No physical evidence. The case stalled. Then, 3 days after Claire vanished, a fisherman discovered her missing keychain. It was lying beneath a bridge nearly 2 miles from the abandoned car. Attached to it was a small metal tag engraved with the number 17. Investigators did not know what the number meant. They searched Claire's apartment. Nothing. They searched her workplace. Nothing. They checked hotel rooms. Nothing. The number remained unexplained. Weeks passed. The newspaper coverage faded. Claire's photograph appeared on missing person posters. Her family organized searches. Volunteers walked the riverbank. Every telephone tip was investigated. Most were worthless. One caller claimed Claire had been seen in Pennsylvania. Another said she had boarded a bus. A third claimed she was living under another name. None were true. Then came the first devastating discovery. A hunter found a woman's scarf near an old quarry. Claire's mother identified it. It belonged to her daughter. The scarf was partially buried. Nearby was a cigarette butt. Claire did not smoke. Investigators collected it. At the time, DNA testing was primitive. No useful profile could be obtained. The evidence was sealed. The case continued. But another detail emerged. The quarry had once been used by Thomas Vale's construction company. Vale had access to the property. He knew the roads. He knew the abandoned buildings. And he had been seen there 2 weeks before Claire disappeared. When questioned, he said he had been inspecting equipment. That explanation seemed reasonable. The investigators searched the quarry. They found nothing. Vale was questioned again. His story remained consistent. He had never met Claire outside work. He had never called her. He had never been near her car. The investigation had no evidence strong enough to challenge him. Then a second suspect appeared. James Morgan, Claire's former boyfriend. They had broken up for months earlier. Morgan admitted the relationship had been difficult. They had argued. Neighbors had heard shouting. But Morgan insisted he had moved on. His alibi was weak. He said he had been driving around that night. No one could confirm it. The newspapers focused on him. The headlines became brutal. Jealous ex-boyfriend sought in missing woman case. Did rage led to disappearance? New Jersey mystery deepens. Morgan became the unofficial suspect. Claire's family hated it. They believed police were looking in the wrong direction. They were right. But nobody knew where to look. The case entered 1986. Then 1987. Then 1988. Every anniversary reopened the wound. Claire's mother continued calling detective. Her brother kept the original missing person poster in his house. Her best friend refused to move away. The family waited. Nothing happened. Then, in 1992, the quarry was sold. Construction crews cleared the property. During excavation, workers found a woman's shoe. It was old, damaged. The size matched Claire's. Investigators returned. The shoe was tested. No DNA. No blood. No definitive identification. The quarry was searched again. Nothing. The case went cold. The years continued. Technology improved. Police databases expanded. Old evidence was digitized, but Claire's case remained buried. Then, in 2008, a detective reviewing cold cases noticed something unusual. The evidence log listed the scarf, the shoe, the cigarette butt, and the keychain. But the cigarette butt was marked as destroyed during testing. No laboratory report existed. The detective requested the original evidence file. A handwritten note was attached. Insufficient sample. No date. No signature. That bothered him. He searched the state laboratory archive. The sample had never been destroyed. It was still there. Sealed. Stored. Forgotten. The detective requested DNA testing. The result was incomplete. But a male DNA profile was detected. It did not match James Morgan. Morgan was eliminated. The case changed direction. Investigators began testing old suspects. Thomas Vale was dead. He had died in 2001. His family agreed to provide DNA samples. The result did not match. Another theory collapsed. The DNA belonged to someone else. Someone investigators had never identified. The case went cold again. Until 2026. A forensic laboratory began using advanced testing methods capable of extracting profiles from extremely degraded evidence. Claire's cigarette butt was selected for reanalysis. Technicians recovered a stronger profile. Then they searched databases. No direct match. But the profile was close to a family line. Investigators traced it. The DNA pointed toward a man named Richard Holloway. Holloway had been 29 in 1985. He lived less than 5 miles from Claire's workplace. He had worked as a security guard, and he had owned a dark blue sedan. Claire's co-workers remembered a dark blue car parked near her office. Holloway had never been questioned. His name did not appear in the original case file. Investigators searched his history. He had moved out of New Jersey in 1987. He had changed jobs. He had married. He had lived quietly for decades. Then he died in 2019. Again, the suspect was dead. But his DNA could still be tested. Investigators obtained a sample from his personal belongings. The result was astonishing. The DNA from the cigarette butt was consistent with Richard Holloway. The probability was overwhelming. The man had been near Claire. His DNA was on evidence found near the quarry. But investigators still needed to connect him to Claire. They examined the old photographs, the abandoned car, the quarry, the river, the scarf. Then they noticed something. The number 17. The keychain tag. Holloway had worked security at a warehouse designated Building 17. The warehouse was owned by Claire's employer. He had access. He knew the employee. He knew the parking lot. He knew the schedules. And according to a former co-worker, Claire had once complained about a security guard watching her. The co-worker remembered his name. Richard. That was enough to reopen the case. Investigators searched the warehouse records. The old security logs survived. On November 14th, still 1985, Holloway signed in at 6:32 p.m. He should have left at 10 o'clock, but the log showed something strange. His exit time had been crossed out. Underneath it was another time. 12:18. Claire disappeared during that window. Holloway had been at the exact location, and he had lied about when he left. Investigators searched his old employment file. His supervisor had written a note the next morning. R. Holloway acted strangely. No explanation. No follow-up. The investigators then located his former girlfriend. She was elderly now, but she remembered Holloway returning home late that night. He had mud on his shoes. He had a cut on his hand, and he was carrying a woman's scarf. She asked where it came from. He told her. Found it. She thought nothing of it. 40 years later, investigators showed her the photograph of Claire's scarf. She began to cry. She said, "That's it?" The scarf found at the quarry was Claire. The cigarette butt contained Holloway's DNA. The security log placed him at the warehouse. The witness remembered him carrying the scarf, and the keychain marked 17 connected Claire to the warehouse. The cold case was no longer cold, but investigators still did not know why Holloway had targeted her. The answer was buried inside Claire's notebook. The payments, the missing money, the suspicious invoices, and a company account connected to a private security contract. Richard Holloway had been receiving payments from a shell company. The same shell company had been used to move money through Claire's employer. She had discovered it. She had started asking questions, and someone had become afraid. The investigation had finally reached the secret buried beneath the disappearance. Claire had not simply vanished. She had found something, and the man whose DNA survived on a forgotten cigarette had been watching her. The mystery that began beside a New Jersey river was about to become something much darker, because investigators discovered that Holloway was not acting alone, and one name in Claire's notebook appeared beside the word, "Don't trust him." That name belonged to someone Claire knew. The name written beneath the warning was not Richard Holloway. It was someone Claire had trusted, someone who had access to her workplace, someone who knew exactly what she had discovered. The name was David Mercer. At first, investigators thought Mercer was simply another employee. He wasn't. He was the company's financial manager. He approved payments. He controlled records. He knew which invoices were legitimate, and he knew which ones were not. Claire had worked directly beneath him. She had trusted him enough to ask questions. That trust may have been the reason she became a target. Investigators examined the notebook again. The handwriting was Claire's. Beside Mercer's name was a short sentence. "Don't trust him." Below it, "He knows about the missing money." Then another line, "Richard is watching me." That sentence connected the two men. Mercer knew about the financial irregularities. Holloway was watching Claire. The investigators began reconstructing the relationship between them. David Mercer had been 38 in 1985, married, well respected. He attended church. He coached youth baseball. He had no criminal history. People described him as quiet and dependable. Richard Holloway was different. He worked nights. He kept to himself. He rarely spoke with coworkers. He had access to the building after hours, and he had been paid by a security contractor connected to Mercer's department. The payments were small, but regular. Investigators found them hidden inside payroll records. Holloway received extra money for special assignments. No details were provided. The first payment came 6 months before Claire disappeared. The last came 2 weeks after. That changed the investigation. Holloway had not simply been a security guard. He may have been working directly for Mercer. The detectives searched the surviving security log. There were entries showing Holloway monitoring Claire's movement. He logged the times she arrived, the times she left, the visitors she received. One note was particularly disturbing. "CB stays late Wednesdays." Another, "CB uses rear entrance." Another, "CB asks about invoices." The initials matched Claire Bennett. Someone had been tracking her routine. Someone had been watching. The investigation now moved from suspicion to surveillance. Claire had not imagined it. She really was being watched. The detectives searched her apartment. The original police photographs showed no obvious signs of a struggle, but one photograph revealed something modern investigators noticed immediately: a small object on the kitchen shelf, a Cosette recorder. The original detectives had not taken it. Claire's brother still had the device. He had kept it in a box of her belongings. The recorder was damaged. The tape inside was partially erased. Forensic technicians recovered fragments of audio. Most was static. Then Claire's voice appeared. She was speaking to someone. Her voice was low, controlled. She said, "I know the numbers don't match." A man's voice answered, "You should stop looking." Claire replied, "I can't." Then another voice, a different man, Richard Holloway. The recording was short, but his voice was recognizable. Claire said, "Why are you following me?" Holloway answered, "Because David told me to." The tape ended. Investigators listened again, then again. For 40 years, nobody had known. Holloway had admitted following Claire, and he had named David Mercer, the financial manager, the man Claire had warned her brother about. The case was exploding. But there was still no evidence proving Mercer ordered Claire's murder. Investigators needed the money trail. They found it. A shell company called Garden State Protective Services had been paying Holloway. The company claimed to provide security consulting, but investigators found no legitimate contract. The payments came from accounts controlled by Mercer. The money then moved through several businesses. The final destination was a private account belonging to Holloway. The pattern was unmistakable. Mercer paid Holloway. Holloway monitored Claire. Claire discovered the financial fraud. Then Claire disappeared. The timeline was becoming impossible to dismiss. November 14th, 6:12 p.m. Claire leaves work. 6:32 p.m. Holloway signs into the security log. 6:47 p.m. Claire's car is seen leaving the company parking lot. 7:03 p.m. Holloway's vehicle leaves through the rear entrance. 7:21 p.m. Claire makes a phone call. 7:28 p.m. The call ends. 8:47 p.m. Claire's mother reports her missing. 4:16 a.m. Claire's car is discovered near the river. The investigators then discovered something strange. The car had been moved. Tire marks near the vehicle did not match the direction Claire normally used to travel. Someone had driven the car onto the service road. The steering wheel contained fingerprints. Most belonged to Claire, but one partial print did not. The original investigators had no database match. In 2026, the print was re-examined. It was too damaged for a definitive identification, but investigators compared it with Holloway's surviving prints. The pattern was consistent. Not enough for absolute certainty, but enough to strengthen the chain. Then came the scarf, the cigarette, the security logs, the recording, the payments, the fingerprints. The investigators now believed Holloway had been inside Claire's vehicle. But what happened next? They returned to the quarry. The scarf had been found there. The cigarette butt had been found nearby. And now investigators discovered an old maintenance building. It had been demolished in 1994, but photographs showed a concrete basement beneath it. Ground-penetrating radar was used. The scan revealed disturbed soil. A narrow rectangular anomaly. The excavation began. At first, there was nothing. Then a piece of plastic. Then a shoe. Not Claire's. A man's work boot. Investigators compared the size. It was consistent with Holloway's footwear. Then they found something else. A brass button. Claire's mother identified it as coming from her daughter's coat. The search continued. No body, but the evidence suggested Claire had been there. The investigators expanded the excavation. They found a small metal container. Inside was a folded receipt. The date was November 14th, SIL 1985. The purchase? Industrial cleaning solvent. The buyer? David Mercer. The location? A hardware store 3 miles from the quarry. The receipt had been paid in cash. The time was 9:42 p.m. Less than 2 hours before Claire's car was found abandoned, investigators began checking Mercer's movement. He claimed he had been home that evening, but a toll receipt placed his vehicle on a nearby highway. The toll was paid at 10:11 p.m. Mercer was heading toward the quarry. He had lied. Again, the case now contained 2 men who had lied. Holloway, Mercer, and both had connections to Claire. Then investigators found a third name. A company executive named Paul Harrow. Harrow had authorized the payments that Mercer controlled. He was the company's president. He had never been questioned. The investigators searched his records. He was dead. But his estate contained business documents. One folder was labeled CB Claire Bennett. Inside were copies of her complaints. The first was dated 6 weeks before her disappearance. Claire had reported missing funds. The second was dated 3 weeks later. She identified irregular security payments. The third was dated 2 days before she disappeared. It contained one sentence: "I believe someone inside the company is monitoring me." Harrow had signed the document. He had written beneath it, "Handle internally." The investigators stared at those words. Handle internally. No police. No audit. No investigation. Just silence. The company had known. They had known Claire was asking questions. They had known money was disappearing. They had known she feared surveillance. And instead of protecting her, they had kept everything inside. The investigators now suspected the murder had been connected to a larger financial scheme, but the missing body remained a problem. Without remains, they could not determine exactly what happened. Then a former quarry worker contacted police. He had seen the news about the reopened case. He remembered something from 1985, a concrete utility room, a smell of chemicals, a dark blue car, and 2 men carrying something heavy. He could not identify the men, but he remembered one of them wearing a security uniform, the same type Holloway wore. He also remembered seeing Mercer. The worker had assumed they were moving equipment. He never reported it. Why? He said nobody asked. The investigators realized how many pieces of the case had been sitting in plain sight. People had seen things. People had heard things. People had remembered things, but the right questions had never been asked. The investigation turned toward the river. If Claire's body had been moved from the quarry, where could it have gone? Historical maps showed several drainage channels. One ran beneath the service road. Another connected to the Passaic River. During heavy rain, the channels could carry objects downstream. If someone wanted to hide a body, the water offered an easy answer. But Claire's body had never been recovered. That was about to change. Divers searched an abandoned section of the river. They found debris, old tires, metal, wood. Then a diver surfaced holding a small piece of fabric. The material was badly deteriorated, but the color matched Claire's coat. DNA testing was attempted. The result was incomplete. But mitochondrial DNA was consistent with Claire's maternal family. It was not enough for a courtroom identification. Yet, it suggested Claire had been near the river. Investigators expanded the search. They discovered a rusted metal drum. Inside were pieces of clothing. One contained a button matching Claire's coat. Another contained traces of the same industrial solvent found on the receipt. The evidence suggested someone had attempted to destroy or conceal her clothing, but there was still no body. Then the investigators found a sealed drainage chamber. It had been closed in 1986. The closure date was November 15th, one day after Claire disappeared. The contractor who sealed it, Mercer's company. That discovery was devastating. Mercer had arranged for the chamber to be sealed immediately after Claire vanished. Why? The official explanation was safety, but the timing was too precise. Investigators reopened the chamber. Inside was mud, debris, broken pipes. Nothing else. Then the forensic team found a small metal object, a bracelet. Claire's bracelet. Her brother identified it. He remembered giving it to her for her 23rd birthday. The bracelet had disappeared with her. Now it was inside the sealed chamber. The case had crossed another line. Claire had been there. And someone had intentionally closed the chamber afterward. The investigators began searching the contractor records. The order had been approved by David Mercer. He signed it himself. The date was November 15th, still 1985, the day after Claire disappeared. At that point, detectives believed Mercer knew she was dead. But did he kill her? The answer appeared in the final piece of financial evidence. A payment to Holloway, $15,000, issued the morning after Claire disappeared. The payment was marked Emergency Security Services. No emergency existed. No work was performed. It was cash. Holloway deposited part of it into his account. The rest disappeared. The investigators now had a possible motive, an accomplice, a payment, surveillance records, physical evidence, and DNA. But the most shocking discovery was still waiting. Inside the old company archive was a handwritten memo from Mercer. It was dated November 13th, one day before Claire disappeared. The memo contained only 6 words. She knows. Deal with it. The signature belonged to David Mercer. For the first time, investigators had written evidence suggesting Mercer knew Claire was a threat before the murder, and that meant the crime may have been planned. The cold case had become something far darker. Claire had not simply crossed paths with a dangerous stranger. She had discovered a secret. She had been watched. She had been warned. She had refused to stop. And 2 men had allegedly been paid to make sure she never spoke again. But investigators still had one question. Who was the person who authorized the final payment? The answer was hidden inside an account that had been closed in 1986. And when detectives finally obtained the records, they discovered a name that had never appeared anywhere in Claire Bennett's case. A name that would explain why the investigation failed so badly. A name that had been sitting inside the original police files for 40 years. The name was not a stranger. It was not a criminal. It was not a man hiding in another state. It was a police officer. Detective Frank Delaney. In 1985, Delaney had been one of the first investigators assigned to Claire Bennett's disappearance. His name appeared on the original case report. His signature appeared on evidence form. His handwriting appeared beside the words, "No further action." And now investigators had discovered something far more troubling. Delaney had also received money from a company connected to David Mercer. The payment was made 3 days after Claire disappeared, $5,000. The description on the bank record was meaningless. Consulting. But Delaney was a police detective. He had no consulting contract with Mercer's company. The payment should never have existed. The discovery sent investigators back through every page of the original file. And suddenly, Old decisions looked different. The scarf had been found. The cigarette had been collected. The quarry had been searched. The security logs existed. The witness had spoken. Yet almost every lead had been dismissed. The pattern was no longer random. Someone had been steering the investigation. Someone had been making sure certain questions were never asked. The first thing investigators examined was the abandoned car. Delaney had personally supervised the processing of the vehicle. His report stated there were no signs of forced entry, but the modern forensic team found something different. A partial palm print had been preserved beneath layers of old protective coating. The print did not belong to Claire. It did not belong to James Morgan, and it was consistent with a male who had handled the steering wheel after Claire left. The investigators compared it with surviving prints from Richard Holloway. The result was inconclusive. Then they compared it with Delaney. The result was stronger. Still not absolute. But suddenly, the detective himself was part of the evidence. Investigators examined Delaney's movements on the night Claire disappeared. His official report stated that he arrived at the station at 11:40 p.m., but a toll record placed his personal vehicle near the river at 10:58. That was almost an hour earlier. Why had he lied? The original case file contained no explanation. Then came another discovery. A gas station employee had reported seeing a police vehicle near the service road shortly before midnight. The report had been filed, but it had never been included in the main case summary. The vehicle number matched Delaney's unit. The witness had also remembered seeing two men near the car. One wore a security uniform. The other wore a dark jacket. Holloway and Mercer. The three names were now appearing together, again and again. But the investigators still needed to determine whether Delaney was part of the murder or merely involved in the cover-up. The answer came from a bank statement. The $5,000 payment to Delaney had been withdrawn in cash the next morning. $400 remained. The rest disappeared. There was no legitimate explanation. The investigators contacted Delaney's surviving family. He had died in 2007. His widow said he had never discussed Claire Bennett. She remembered the case. She remembered the newspapers. But she claimed Frank had always said the investigation was a mess. Then she gave investigators access to his old office box. Inside was a photograph. Three men stood beside a company vehicle. David Mercer, Richard Holloway, Frank Delaney. The photograph had been taken in 1984, a year before Claire disappeared. That proved the men knew one another. It did not prove murder, but it destroyed the idea that Delaney's involvement was accidental. Then investigators noticed the date written on the back. October 1984, Mercer job. A year before Claire vanished. The financial relationship had existed before the crime. Delaney had known Mercer. He had known Holloway. And he had access to the police investigation. The case had become a possible conspiracy. But investigators still lacked the motive connecting Delaney directly to Claire. They returned to the notebook. Claire had written names, numbers, payment amounts, and beside one entry was the phrase, police? The word was underlined 3 times. She had apparently discovered that someone inside law enforcement was connected to the company. That explained her fear. She was not simply afraid of Mercer. She may have realized that reporting the fraud could put her in danger because someone inside the department could warn them. The investigators examined Claire's final telephone records. At 7:21 p.m. on November 14th, she made a call lasting 7 minutes. The number belonged to the police department. The call had been answered by Detective Delaney. The original report described it as routine inquiry, but Claire had written the call in her notebook. Beside it were the words, "He knows." Investigators believed she had called Delaney because she suspected something. She may have asked for help. Instead, Delaney may have alerted Mercer. If true, that call became the turning point. Within minutes, Holloway's vehicle left the company parking lot. Claire was followed. The meeting at the quarry began, and the investigation later focused on Morgan. The timing was terrifying. Claire had reached out. Someone she believed could help may have betrayed her. The detectives reconstructed the final hours again. At 7:21, Claire calls Delaney. At 7:28, the call ends. At 7:36, Holloway leaves work. At 7:49, Mercer leaves his home. At 8:03, Delaney's police vehicle is seen near the river. At 8:17, Claire's car approaches the quarry. At 8:31, the security log records Holloway entering the property. At 8:43, Mercer arrives. At 9:06, Claire disappears from view. The exact sequence remained uncertain, but the convergence was undeniable. 3 men, 1 location, 1 frightened woman, 1 missing person, and 1 police detective who later controlled the investigation. The investigators then examined the original evidence inventory. 5 items had disappeared. Claire's second Cosette, a blood-stained cloth, a set of tire impressions, a handwritten note, and a photograph from the quarry. 5 pieces of evidence, all connected to the same location, all missing. The question was where they went. Then investigators discovered that Detective Delaney had signed the final evidence transfer. The items had been removed from the case. The official explanation was contamination, but no laboratory record confirmed that. The evidence had simply vanished. The investigators searched Delaney's former property record. His house had been demolished years earlier, but the garage had remained. A new owner agreed to a search. Inside the foundation was an old metal cabinet. The cabinet was rusted shut. When investigators opened it, they found police files, old newspapers, photographs, and 1 Cosette tape. The label read, Claire B. The investigators played it. Static. Then a voice. Claire. She sounded frightened. She said, I called the police. A man's voice responded, You shouldn't have. Claire answered, I know what you're doing. The man's voice became clearer. You don't know anything. Then Claire said a name. Frank. The recording stopped. The investigators listened again. They enhanced the audio. The man's voice was compared with old recordings of Detective Frank Delaney. The result was not formally conclusive, but experts found similarities in speech patterns, cadence, and pronunciation. Then another voice appeared. Mercer. The conversation seemed to continue. The recording captured only fragment. Money? Ledger. She copied everything. Find it. Then a final sentence. If she talks, we're all finished. The tape ended. Investigators believed it was the missing second recording, the one Claire had made before disappearing. It changed the case. Claire had known. She had recorded them. She had tried to protect herself, and she had mentioned Delaney. The investigators now believed the original detective may have been one of the people she feared. The next question was devastating. Why had Claire called him? Maybe she did not know he was involved. Maybe she believed he could protect her. Maybe she had suspected something but had not yet understood how deep it went. Whatever the reason, the call may have exposed her location. The investigators then examined Delaney's phone records. At 7:29 p.m., 1 minute after his call with Claire ended, Delaney called David Mercer. The call lasted 3 minutes. Then Mercer called Holloway. 2 minutes. The sequence was almost impossible to explain innocently. Claire called Delaney. Delaney called Mercer. Mercer called Holloway. Then Holloway followed Claire. The investigators now had a chain, and that chain pointed toward one conclusion. Claire had not been randomly targeted. She had been reported to the people watching her. The investigation became a race through old records. Who knew what? When did they know it? Who received money? Who changed reports? Who removed evidence? The financial records provided the answer. Mercer paid Holloway. Mercer paid Delaney. Harrow approved the accounts. And the company itself benefited from keeping the fraudulent invoices hidden. The money was not enormous. That was what made it so effective. Small payments. Separate accounts. Cash withdrawals. Consulting fees. Security contracts. Nothing dramatic. Nothing that would immediately trigger suspicion. But together, they formed a system designed to protect a financial secret. Claire had discovered the system, and then she disappeared. The investigators finally understood why the original case had collapsed. The person assigned to investigate the disappearance may have been connected to the people responsible. Every major lead passed through Delaney. Every suspicious item passed through his hands. Every report was reviewed by him. Every theory was influenced by him. And the first suspect, James Morgan, became the perfect distraction. Morgan had the wrong motive, the wrong evidence, the wrong timeline. But he had one thing the real suspects needed: a history with Claire. That was enough. The newspapers accepted it. The public accepted it. Even some investigators accepted it. Morgan spent years carrying the accusation. He denied killing Claire until the day he died. He never received a formal apology. His family later told investigators that the case destroyed his life. He lost his job. His marriage ended. His reputation never recovered, and all along, the people who may have been responsible watched from a distance. That realization gave the cold case a second victim, James Morgan. Not murdered, but destroyed by a false narrative. The investigators located his old statements. One line stood out. "I know you think I did it, but you're looking at the wrong man." The sentence had been written in 1986. 40 years later, investigators finally agreed. They had been looking at the wrong man. Then came the most important physical discovery. The old cigarette butt from the quarry produced a partial DNA profile. The profile matched Richard Holloway, but the laboratory found another biological trace, a second male contributor. The sample was extremely weak. Still, investigators extracted enough genetic material to compare against relatives of David Mercer. The result showed a familial relationship, not proof by itself, but enough to indicate Mercer could have contributed the second profile. The forensic team tested additional items: the scarf, the car, the metal bracelet. One by one, the evidence began producing results. Holloway's DNA, possible Mercer DNA, Claire's biological material, the same location, the same night, the same people. Then investigators discovered something else. The original quarry search had stopped 12 feet from the location where the modern team found the bracelet. 12 feet. That was all. 12 feet separated the first investigators from one of the most important clues in the case. The difference was technology. Modern ground-penetrating radar, modern DNA testing, modern digital reconstruction. And time. Time had not destroyed the evidence. It had preserved it. The final breakthrough came from the old police archive. A document was found behind a false panel in Delaney's former filing cabinet. It was a handwritten payment list. 3 names: Holloway, Mercer, Delaney. Beside each name was an amount. Then one final line: problem contained. The date was November 15th, Sill 1985, the day after Claire disappeared. Investigators believed the phrase referred to Claire. There was no other obvious explanation. For the first time, the evidence suggested that the cover-up had been organized immediately after her disappearance. The money moved. The reports changed. The evidence vanished. The suspect narrative was redirected, and the investigation closed around the wrong man. But one mystery remained. Where was Claire? The quarry had produced her scarf. The river had produced part of her clothing. The drainage chamber had produced her bracelet, but her remains had never been found. Without them, investigators could reconstruct the crime. They could identify suspects. They could establish motive. But they could not give Claire's family the one thing they had wanted for 4 decades: a place to mourn. Then a former construction worker remembered something: a concrete foundation, a section of the quarry that had been covered after a landslide. He said workers had been ordered to pour concrete over the area in November 1985. The order had come from Mercer's company. The work was completed within 2 days. The location had never been searched. Investigators returned. They drilled through the concrete. The equipment struck something beneath the surface. Not rock, not metal, something softer. The excavation stopped. Forensic specialists were called. The entire site was sealed. And beneath 40 years of concrete and soil, investigators found what the town had been waiting for: a human bone. Then another, and another. The cold case had finally reached the point where the missing woman was no longer missing, but the evidence beneath that concrete would reveal exactly what happened to Claire Bennett on the night she disappeared. The excavation stopped the entire town. For 40 years, the quarry had been nothing more than an abandoned scar beside the river, a place people drove past, a place children were told to avoid, a place that had appeared in the background of Claire Bennett's disappearance without ever giving up its secret. Now, forensic tents covered the ground. Police vehicles lined the access road. Every entrance was sealed. And beneath layers of concrete, investigators had found human remains. The first bone was small. The second was larger. Then came a fragment of a skull. There was no longer any doubt. Someone had been buried beneath the concrete. The forensic team worked slowly. Every inch of soil was screened. Every fragment was photographed. Every piece was catalogued. The excavation continued through the night. At 2:14 a.m., investigators found a small metal object, a necklace pendant. Claire's brother identified it immediately. He had seen it thousands of times. Claire wore it almost every day. The pendant carried her initials: CB. the same initials appearing throughout the case. The remains were sent for DNA testing. The result came back 2 days later. The match was conclusive. The remains belonged to Claire Bennett. After 40 years, the missing woman finally had a name attached to her bones. The announcement shook New Jersey. News crews surrounded the quarry. Old newspaper headlines resurfaced. Claire's photograph appeared again, but this time, beneath it was a different sentence. Remains identified in 1985 cold case. For Claire's family, the discovery was devastating. They had spent decades imagining every possible ending. Maybe she was alive. Maybe she had left voluntarily. Maybe someone had taken her. Now there was no uncertainty. Claire had been murdered. The question became how. Forensic examination revealed fractures consistent with blunt force trauma. The injuries were consistent with an attack. There were no signs of prolonged exposure. She had not died naturally. She had been killed. And investigators believed the quarry was not necessarily the place where she died. The remains showed signs that the body had been moved. That meant the killer had used multiple locations: the abandoned car, the quarry, the river, the drainage chamber, the concrete burial site. The crime had been deliberately scattered across the landscape. That explained why the original investigation had failed. Every clue pointed somewhere different. The car suggested a roadside abduction. The scarf suggested the quarry. The clothing suggested the river. The bracelet suggested the drainage system. The remains suggested the concrete foundation. The killer had created a maze, and for decades, investigators had followed it. Now, they had the technology to walk backward. The forensic team examined the bone. A small fragment contained traces of industrial solvent, the same type of solvent purchased by David Mercer on the night Claire disappeared. That connection was powerful, but investigators needed more. They searched the old construction records. The concrete foundation had been poured on November 15th, still 1985, the day after Claire disappeared. The company responsible? Mercer's employer. The project manager? David Mercer. The workers were ordered to seal the area immediately. The official reason was structural instability, but the original engineering report contained no such emergency. The paperwork had been created afterward. Investigators believed the concrete had been poured to conceal the burial site. That meant someone knew where Claire was, and someone had enough authority to cover it. The investigators then reopened the financial record. The morning after Claire vanished, Mercer authorized the emergency concrete work. Holloway received $15,000. Delaney received $5,000. The money moved. The concrete was poured. The evidence disappeared. The pattern was now almost complete, but investigators still needed to understand the role of David Mercer. They returned to the recovered recording. Claire's voice, Mercer's voice, Holloway's voice, and the unknown voice believed to be Delaney. The audio experts enhanced the final section. At first, there was only static. Then a door closed. Someone breathed heavily. Claire said, "Please?" A man answered, "You should have stopped." Claire replied, "I told you I wouldn't." Then a loud impact. Silence. A few seconds later, Mercer spoke. "Is she breathing?" Holloway answered, "Yes." Mercer said, "Then finish it." The recording ended. Investigators replayed it. Again. Again. There was no longer any doubt about the seriousness of the evidence. It did not capture the murder itself, but it captured the moments before. It captured the discussion afterward, and it placed Mercer and Holloway together. The forensic team attempted to identify the third voice. The analysis was limited. The tape had degraded, but linguistic experts found similarities to Frank Delaney. The evidence was not sufficient to say with absolute certainty that Delaney was the speaker, but other evidence placed him inside the conspiracy. The payments, the missing evidence, the altered reports, the false suspect, the deleted interview, the photograph, the toll record, the timeline. Everything pointed in the same direction. Delaney had not merely failed to solve the case, he may have helped bury it. That possibility became the most disturbing part of the investigation, because Claire had called the police before she disappeared. She had asked for help, and the person who answered may have been working for the people she feared. The investigators recovered the original telephone log. Claire's call was listed as 7 minutes, but another notation had been added later. Caller became emotional. No threat. The handwriting belonged to Delaney, but the statement was false. Claire's recording showed she was frightened. She believed she was in danger. She had told someone, and that person apparently did nothing. The investigation then focused on what happened after the call. At 7:29 p.m., Delaney called Mercer. At 7:32, Mercer called Holloway. At 7:36, Holloway left the warehouse. At 7:49, Mercer left his home. At 8:03, Delaney's vehicle appeared near the river. At 8:17, Claire's car reached the quarry. The timing suggested coordination, but investigators needed one final confirmation. They searched Holloway's old belongings. His family had kept a locked toolbox. Inside was a key. The key had a small tag, number 17, the same number found on Claire's keychain. The key opened a storage room at the warehouse. Storage room 17. Inside the room, investigators found no original evidence, but historical photographs showed shelving unit, and one photograph captured a wooden crate. The crate was later identified in company records. It had been removed on November 15th, SIL 1985. The destination? The quarry. The crate had been listed as equipment, but its dimensions were large enough to conceal a body. The investigators believed Claire's body may have been transported inside it. That explained how the remains were moved without attracting attention. The crate was loaded onto a company truck. Mercer controlled the paperwork. Holloway had access to the warehouse. Delaney could protect the operation from police scrutiny. 3 roles. 1 crime. 1 victim. The evidence was becoming impossible to dismiss. Then investigators found something even more chilling. Claire's notebook contained one final entry. The handwriting was hurried. The letters were uneven. She had written, "Mercer knows about the ledger." Then, "Richard follows me." Then, "Frank said he could help." The last sentence was underlined. Perhaps Claire still believed Delaney was helping her. Perhaps she did not know he was involved. That possibility made the case even darker. She may have walked into the trap because she believed the police were on her side. The investigators reconstructed the meeting. Claire arrives at the quarry. Mercer is waiting. Holloway is present. Delaney arrives later. Claire believes she is receiving help. Instead, she is confronted. The ledger is demanded. She refuses. She says she has copies. She says someone else knows. Mercer panics. Holloway restrains her. The struggle begins. Her coat tears. Her blood appears. The recorder continues. She is struck. She falls. She survives the first attack. Then Mercer gives the order. Holloway completes it. The body is moved. The clothing is scattered. The car is staged. The evidence is destroyed. The quarry is sealed. And Delaney takes control of the investigation. That was the theory. But theories needed evidence. Investigators found it in the concrete. A tiny fragment of blue fabric was embedded beneath the foundation. Laboratory testing showed it matched the material of Claire's coat. More importantly, traces of the same industrial solvent were found on it. The solvent purchased by Mercer. The evidence connected the murder scene to the burial site. The final piece came from the financial records. The $20,000 payment from the company had been split. $15,000 to Holloway, $5,000 to Delaney. Mercer kept the remainder. The payments were made within 24 hours of Claire's disappearance. The investigators believed the money was not for work. It was payment for silence. The case was no longer simply a murder investigation. It was an organized cover-up. And the cover-up had lasted 40 years. But one question remained. Why Claire? Why was a 23-year-old accounts clerk considered dangerous enough to kill? The answer was inside the ledger. The missing money totaled nearly $800,000. In 1985, that was an enormous amount. The company had been creating false invoices. Money was being diverted through shell businesses. Contractors were being paid for work they never performed. Security contracts were inflated. Some payments returned to company executives. Others went to people who helped keep the system running. Claire had discovered the pattern. She had copied the invoices. She had recorded conversations. She had prepared evidence. She had intended to expose everything. That made her dangerous. Not because she had power, because she had proof. The investigators traced one final payment. A check had been issued to a company connected to Mercer. The amount was $92,000. The invoice claimed the money was for emergency construction. No construction occurred. Claire had circled the transaction. Beside it, she wrote, "Fake." Then another word. Why? That question had remained unanswered for 40 years. Now investigators knew the money was being used to fund the hidden operation. The same network that generated fraudulent contracts was paying the people who helped silence Claire. The crime had been born from greed, protected by fear, and hidden behind authority. The public announcement came on a cold morning. Investigators stood before the camera. They confirmed that Claire Bennett's remains had been found. They confirmed that modern forensic testing had identified DNA evidence. They confirmed that multiple people had been linked to the investigation. But they also said something unexpected. The case would remain classified as solved even though no living suspect could be prosecuted for the murder. Mercer was dead. Holloway was dead. Delaney was dead. The three men believed responsible were gone. Justice had arrived too late. The announcement left Claire's family with an unbearable contradiction. They finally had the truth. But there would be no courtroom, no verdict, no sentence, no moment when the accused would have to look at Claire's family and answer for what they had done. Only evidence, only records, only the final reconstruction. Claire's brother stood outside the courthouse holding the photograph of his sister. He said nothing for several minutes. Then he looked toward the cameras. He said, "She was never missing to us." The sentence spread across the country. For 40 years, Claire had been described as a missing woman. Now, the language changed. She was a murder victim. Her name had been cleared. Her family had an answer. And the people who had hidden the truth could no longer hide behind the passage of time. But there was still one disturbing detail. The original case file had been altered. Pages were missing. Evidence had disappeared. Witness statements had been shortened. And someone had deliberately pushed investigators toward James Morgan. The question was no longer whether the investigation had failed. It had. The question was whether it had been made to fail. And investigators now believed the answer was yes. The secret buried beneath the concrete had not been only Claire's body. It had been the truth itself. For 4 decades, the truth had been sealed under layers of paperwork, fear, money, and silence. Then a forgotten cigarette but produced DNA. A photograph revealed a lie. A notebook exposed a warning. A bank statement revealed a payment. A concrete foundation revealed a grave. And one by one, the walls came down. But the final evidence would come from the place where Claire had worked. Because investigators discovered that the original ledger was not the only document she had hidden. There was another file. A file she had prepared for police. And inside it was a list of every person she believed was involved. The first 3 names were already known. The 4th name had never appeared in the investigation. And when detectives saw it, they understood why Claire had been so afraid to speak. The 4th name belonged to someone who had remained alive long enough to see the entire cold case collapse around him. The 4th name was not written in the ledger. It was written on a separate sheet of paper. Claire had folded it twice. Across the top, she had written one word. Inside. Beneath it was a name. Arthur Bell. In 1985, Bell was the regional vice president of the company where Claire worked. He was 56 years old. He controlled budgets. He approved contracts. He knew Mercer. He knew Delaney. And unlike the others, Arthur Bell was still alive. Investigators found him living quietly in another state. He was 89 years old. For decades, he had never been publicly connected to Claire's disappearance. His name had never appeared as a suspect. Never. Not once. But Claire had written it herself, and beside his name were 4 words. He ordered everything. The investigators flew to meet Bell. They arrived with the ledger, the photographs, the payment records, the recordings, and the final list. Bell looked at the documents without speaking. Then investigators placed Claire's photograph in front of him. For several seconds he stared at it. Finally, he said, "I wondered when you would find me." That sentence stunned the room. He did not deny knowing Claire. He did not deny knowing Mercer. He did not deny knowing Holloway. And he did not deny knowing Delaney. Instead, he asked one question. "Is the ledger complete?" Investigators realized immediately what he meant. He was not asking whether Claire had been found. He was asking whether the financial records had survived. They told him yes. Bell closed his eyes. The secret had survived. But not in the way he had expected. The investigators began asking questions. Bell admitted that the company had been moving money through false contracts. He admitted Mercer handled the account. He admitted Holloway provided security. He admitted Delaney had been paid. But he stopped short of admitting that he ordered Claire's murder. He claimed he only wanted her frightened. He said the purpose was to recover the documents. He said Mercer had promised there would be no violence. But then he said something that changed the case. Mercer lost control. Investigators asked what he meant. Bell refused to answer. They pressed him. He finally said, "She wasn't supposed to die." That was the first time anyone connected directly to the financial operation acknowledged Claire's death, not as an accident, not as a disappearance, as something that happened during an operation designed to silence her. Bell claimed he never saw Claire after November 14th. He said he learned she was dead the following morning. He said Mercer called him. According to Bell, Mercer told him, "We have a problem." Bell asked, "Is she alive?" Mercer answered, "No, no." The investigators asked why Bell did not call police. He said, "Because by then there was too much to lose." That sentence became the center of the interview. Too much to lose. Money, reputation, freedom, perhaps even lives. Bell claimed the operation had been running for years. The false invoices were only one part. Money was being diverted through construction projects across northern New Jersey. Some contracts existed only on paper, others were inflated. Payments were split between companies. Cash was returned through intermediaries. People inside the organization received shares, and anyone who discovered too much was pressured into silence. Claire had discovered the system accidentally. She noticed that 2 invoices had identical labor descriptions. The amounts were different. The contractors were different, but the wording was identical. She checked more, then more. The numbers began forming a pattern. She realized millions could be moving through the account. She started copying everything. That was when Mercer noticed. At first, he tried to discourage her. Then he warned her. Then Holloway began watching her. And when Claire refused to stop, the pressure became a threat. Bell admitted that Mercer had told him, "She has copies." Bell said he ordered Mercer to recover them. He claimed he never ordered Claire killed, but investigators confronted him with Claire's final note. He ordered everything. Bell stared at the paper. Then he said, "She knew." Investigators asked, "Knew what?" Bell answered, "She knew I was involved." Silence filled the room. Claire had not simply discovered fraudulent invoices, she had discovered who was behind them. Bell was the highest-ranking person connected to the scheme, and now investigators understood why her list contained 4 names: Mercer, Holloway, Delaney, Bell. 4 men, for different roles. One secret. The investigators then asked Bell about the police detective. He admitted Delaney had been paid. He claimed the payment was for protection, not from police, from exposure. Bell said Delaney had been useful because he could control what entered the official case. If evidence pointed toward the company, Delaney could redirect attention. If witnesses mentioned employees, he could classify their statements as unreliable. If a suspect appeared more convenient, he could focus the investigation there. Bell confirmed what investigators had suspected for years. James Morgan had been selected because he was easy to blame. Bell said, "Everyone already believed he was capable." That sentence explained the entire tragedy. The public wanted a simple answer. A jealous ex-boyfriend. An angry man. A woman disappears. Case solved in headlines. But it was not solved. It was manufactured. Morgan had been innocent. Claire had been silenced. And the real suspects had watched him carry the blame. Investigators asked Bell where Claire's body had been buried. He said he did not know. They asked whether he had visited the quarry. He said no. They showed him the construction records. His company had authorized the concrete. He claimed he had not known why. Then investigators showed him the payment records. $15,000 to Holloway, $5,000 to Delaney. The remaining amount routed through Mercer. Bell looked at the page. His expression changed. He understood. The investigators knew. There was nowhere left to hide. Then Bell revealed something no document had shown. The original plan was to move Claire out of state. Mercer had arranged for her to be taken to Pennsylvania. The idea was to make it appear she had voluntarily disappeared. Her car would be abandoned. Her belongings would be scattered. Her bank account would remain untouched. A false trail would suggest she had left New Jersey. But something went wrong. Claire fought. She screamed. She refused to surrender the ledger. Holloway panicked. Mercer attacked her. She was seriously injured. Then, according to Bell, Mercer called him. Bell said he told Mercer to call an ambulance. Mercer refused. He said the police could never see Claire alive. That was the moment the plan became murder. Bell claimed he did not participate, but he knew. He knew Claire was dead. He knew evidence was being destroyed. He knew police were being manipulated, and he remained silent. The investigators asked about the concrete. Bell said Mercer arranged it. The foundation was scheduled for repair anyway. They accelerated the work. The body was placed beneath it. Then concrete covered the grave. The operation was completed before anyone realized Claire was gone. But there was a problem. Claire had hidden copies of the evidence. That meant the murder had not solved anything. The investigators returned to the ledger. Claire's original documents contained more than financial transactions. She had created a map, a network. Lines connected names, companies, accounts, bank numbers, and dates. At the center was Arthur Bell. Around him were Mercer, Holloway, Delaney, and several businesses. Claire had written notes beside each. Mercer, Holloway, surveillance. Delaney, police. Bell, orders. The simplicity of the words was chilling. She had understood the entire structure. She had been building a case against them, and she had known she was in danger. The investigators then examined another page. At the bottom, Claire had written, "If I disappear, start with Bell." She had predicted exactly what would happen. She knew someone would try to make her disappearance look voluntary. She knew someone would blame another man. She knew the truth would be buried. But she had left instructions, and 40 years later, investigators were following them. The case now moved beyond murder. Federal investigators became involved because the financial scheme crossed state lines. Old bank accounts were reopened. Corporate records were examined. Several companies that had existed in the 1980s were traced. The investigators discovered that the money had continued moving even after Claire disappeared. The fraud did not stop. It simply became more careful. Mercer remained involved until his death. Bell continued managing business interests. Holloway received occasional payment. Delaney continued working in law enforcement, and James Morgan lived under suspicion. The people responsible had not simply escaped justice. They had continued benefiting from the system they had protected. That realization angered investigators because Claire's death had not been the end of the story. It had been the moment the cover-up became permanent. The original investigation had lasted months, then years, then decades. The evidence slowly disappeared. Witnesses died. Buildings were demolished. Records were destroyed. People forgot details. But one thing remained: Claire's handwriting. She had written everything down. Her fear, her suspicions, the names, the money, the warning, the final instructions. And now investigators could compare her notes with the physical evidence. Every major point matched. Holloway's DNA, Mercer's financial records, Delaney's payments, Bell's authority, the quarry, the concrete, the missing evidence, the abandoned car, the false suspect. The pieces formed one continuous chain. There was no single dramatic clue. There was something more powerful: consistency. Every new discovery strengthened the last, and every old mystery finally had an explanation. Why was Claire's car abandoned? To create the appearance of a disappearance. Why was her scarf at the quarry? Because her body had been moved there. Why was her bracelet in the drainage chamber? Because evidence had been scattered. Why was her DNA found on the cigarette? Because Holloway had been near her. Why was Mercer buying industrial solvent? To clean the scene. Why was concrete poured the next day? To conceal the burial. Why did Delaney redirect the investigation? Because he had been paid. Why was James Morgan blamed? Because someone needed a suspect. Why did Claire write Bell's name? Because he stood above the others. And why did the truth survive? Because Claire knew someone might come looking. The final interview with Bell lasted nearly 6 hours. Toward the end, investigators asked him one last question. Did you ever think Claire's family would find out? Bell remained silent. Then he said, "Not after 40 years. The investigator replied, "That's exactly why they did." Bell looked down. He was 89. Mercer was dead. Holloway was dead. Delaney was dead. The men who had controlled the story were gone, but the evidence remained. Bell could no longer control it. He could not erase the ledger. He could not destroy the DNA. He could not rewrite Claire's notebook. And he could not bury the quarry again. The authorities announced that the case was officially solved. They named Claire Bennett as the victim of a planned killing. They identified the central figures in the conspiracy. They cleared James Morgan. and they publicly acknowledged that major failures had occurred during the original investigation. For Claire's family, the word solved felt strange. There was relief, but there was also anger. 40 years had passed, a lifetime. Claire's mother never saw her daughter's remains. Her father died believing he had failed to protect her. Her brother carried the unanswered question for decades. Now, finally, there was a place to take flowers. The quarry was no longer just an abandoned piece of land. It had become the place where Claire's story ended. But it was also the place where the truth began again. Investigators placed a marker near the excavation site. No sensational words, no accusations, just her name, Claire Bennett, 1982, 1985. Love, remembered. The case that had once been reduced to a headline became something else, a warning, a reminder that evidence can disappear, witnesses can be ignored, investigations can be manipulated, and a lie can survive for decades, but it can also collapse, sometimes because of DNA, sometimes because of a forgotten document, sometimes because someone kept an old photograph, and sometimes because a victim leaves behind enough truth to survive the people who tried to silence her. The final item recovered from Claire's apartment was placed into the evidence archive. Her notebook. The pages were worn. The ink had faded. But the final sentence remained clear. If I disappear, don't let them make me disappear twice. For 40 years, Claire had been missing. Then she was found. For 40 years, her story had been distorted. Then it was corrected. And for 40 years, the people who knew the truth believed time would protect them. It didn't. Time became the enemy of the killer, because every year added another record, another photograph, another bank statement, another witness, another piece of evidence, until the secret became too large to hide. The New Jersey cold case was finally solved, but the most haunting part was not the discovery beneath the concrete. It was what happened before the concrete was poured. Claire knew something was wrong. She knew someone was watching. She knew someone inside the company was involved. She knew the police might not protect her. And still, she kept collecting evidence. She kept writing. She kept recording. She kept going. That is why her voice survived. Not because the system protected her. It didn't. Not because justice came quickly. It didn't. Her voice survived because she left the truth behind. And 40 years later, someone finally listened. The final interview with Arthur Bell ended at 11:38 p.m. Investigators left the room carrying boxes of documents, but Bell remained behind the glass. He looked smaller now, older, almost fragile. Yet one sentence kept returning to the investigators. Not after 40 years. Bell had believed time would erase everything. He was wrong, because the deeper investigators went, the more evidence they found, and the evidence did not point to one isolated act of violence. It pointed to a system that had survived because everyone inside it had a reason to stay silent. Money, fear, loyalty, reputation, and power. The investigators returned to the original police station. The building had been renovated several times. Entire rooms had disappeared. Walls had been removed. Old evidence lockers had been replaced, but the basement remained. That was where the original case archives had been stored. Boxes covered the floor. Most were labeled by case number. Some had no labels at all. One box carried Claire Bennett's name. Inside were newspaper clippings, photographs, witness statements, telephone records, and a small brown envelope. The envelope had never been opened. Across the front was written, "Do not file." The handwriting belonged to Detective Frank Delaney. Investigators opened it carefully. Inside was a single photograph. Claire, standing outside the company building, taken from a distance. She was looking over her shoulder. Someone had photographed her without her knowledge. On the back was a date, November 12th, Sill 1985, 2 days before she disappeared. Under the date were 3 words. She suspects us. The photograph changed the timeline. Claire had been under surveillance before her final day, and Delaney knew. Investigators then examined the film negative. It had been stored separately. The negative showed something the photograph did not. A second person stood behind Claire, Richard Holloway. He was watching her. And farther in the background was a parked sedan. The vehicle belonged to David Mercer. 3 men. 1 photograph. 2 days before the murder. The investigators realized the surveillance had been coordinated. Claire had been watched by multiple people. Not one, Not two. Several. The question became how long it had been happening. They searched earlier photographs. September. October. November. The same dark blue sedan appeared repeatedly outside Claire's apartment, near her workplace, near the grocery store, near the restaurant where she met friends. Someone had been tracking her routine for months. Then they found another photograph. This one showed Claire entering the police station. The date was November 14th. The photograph had been taken shortly after she called Delaney. That meant someone had followed her even after she sought police help. The investigators believed Holloway had been waiting outside. Claire may have seen him. That could explain why she left through a different entrance, but it did not explain why she went to the quarry, unless she believed someone was meeting her there. The investigators searched the recovered notebook again. One page contained an address. The address belonged to the quarry. Beneath it, Claire had written, "Mercer wants to talk." She had gone willingly. She believed she was going to confront Mercer. She may have believed Delaney would protect her. Instead, she walked directly into the place where she would die. The recovered audio supported that theory. Claire sounded angry, not helpless. She confronted Mercer. She demanded answers. She said she had copies. She threatened to expose the company. Mercer demanded the ledger. Claire refused. Then, Holloway appeared. She realized the meeting had been a trap. Her fear came through on the tape. She asked, "Why is he here?" Mercer answered, "Because you wouldn't listen." The recording ended shortly afterward. Investigators believed the physical struggle followed. The forensic evidence supported it. Claire's coat had been torn. Her bracelet had broken. Her scarf had been pulled away. The blunt force injuries were severe. She survived long enough to speak. Then she stopped. The investigators reconstructed the scene using modern crime scene software. The quarry was larger in 1985 than it appeared today. There were abandoned sheds, equipment yards, concrete foundations, drainage channels, a river access road, several locations where a vehicle could disappear from view. At night, the area was almost completely dark. No streetlights, no nearby houses, no traffic. A perfect place for a crime. And someone knew that. Richard Holloway knew it. David Mercer knew it. Frank Delaney knew it. Arthur Bell knew it. They had all been connected to the property. That was not coincidence. The investigators then discovered an old maintenance map. One section was marked restricted. The restricted zone contained the concrete foundation where Claire's remains were eventually found. The map had been signed by Mercer, but there was another signature. Frank Delaney. Why would a police detective sign a private construction map? That question had no answer in the original investigation. Now it did. Delaney had been there before. He knew the location. He knew what the company controlled. He knew where evidence could disappear. And he knew how police would search. The investigators began reviewing every police report Delaney had written. A pattern appeared. Whenever evidence pointed toward Mercer, the language became uncertain. Possible. Unconfirmed. Insufficient. Whenever evidence pointed toward Morgan, the language became definitive. Suspicious. Jealous. Potentially violent. The contrast was striking. Morgan's unverified behavior became evident. Mercer's documented behavior became speculation. That was not an investigation. It was direction. Someone was directing the case. The investigators contacted Morgan's surviving relatives. They found a box of letters. Morgan had written dozens of letters to police. Most were never answered. One letter was dated March 1986. He wrote, "I know Claire did not leave me. She was afraid of someone from her work." That sentence had been ignored. Another letter contained a name, David Mercer. Morgan had written that Claire had mentioned Mercer weeks before her disappearance. Again, nobody followed up. The investigators found the original envelope. It had been opened. The letter had been read. Then it had disappeared from the main file. Someone had deliberately removed information that could have redirected the investigation. The question was who? The handwriting on the filing note matched Delaney. The case was becoming darker with every document. The investigators then looked at the telephone records from Claire's final week. She had called Morgan once. She had called her brother 3 times. She had called the police twice. And she had received 7 calls from an unlisted number. The calls lasted less than 2 minutes. The number belonged to a private line registered to a security company. The security company was controlled by Holloway's employer. The line had been active for only 3 months. It was disconnected 2 days after Claire disappeared. Another piece of evidence. Another deliberate disappearance. Investigators traced the phone bills. The calls were made from locations near Claire's workplace. Someone was watching. Someone was calling. Someone wanted her frightened. But why had they waited so long to kill her? Because they needed the ledger. Claire had refused to give it up. She had hidden copies. The investigators searched her family's belongings. Her brother remembered a small wooden box Claire had used for personal paper. The box had been missing since the disappearance. They asked where she kept important documents. He mentioned a place she used as a teenager, an old locker at a community center. The locker still existed. The key was long gone. The center had been renovated, but the storage records showed that Claire's locker had never been reassigned. Investigators opened it. Inside was nothing. Just dust. Then they noticed the bottom panel was loose. Beneath it was a sealed plastic envelope. Inside were photocopies, invoices, bank transfers, names, dates, and a handwritten statement from Claire. She had written it 2 days before her disappearance. "I don't trust the police." The sentence was followed by another. "Delaney knows." Then, "Mercer is not acting alone." The investigators read every page. Claire had documented the entire scheme. She had listed payments to shell companies. She had identified Holloway's security contract. She had recorded Mercer approving fraudulent invoices. And she had written about Arthur Bell. Bell had approved the largest transfer. The financial network stretched across multiple states. Money moved from New Jersey to Pennsylvania, from Pennsylvania to Delaware, from Delaware to accounts controlled by intermediaries. Some of those accounts had been closed in the months after Claire disappeared. Others remained active for years. The scheme was far larger than anyone had suspected. Claire had uncovered only part of it. The investigators contacted federal financial crime specialists. They began rebuilding the network. What they found was shocking. The company had moved more than $4 million through questionable contracts over a 7-year period. Not all of it was necessarily criminal, but a substantial portion could not be explained by legitimate business. Some money had gone to private investigators, some to security companies, some to shell corporations, and a small portion had gone directly to people connected to Claire's disappearance. The murder appeared to have been part of a much larger criminal operation, but there was still a question of intent. Had Bell ordered Claire killed? His own words suggested he had authorized the intimidation, but murder required more. Investigators confronted him again. This time, they placed Claire's recovered recording in front of him. They played the final seconds. Mercer's voice, Holloway's voice, then the words, "If she talks, we're all finished." Bell listened without moving. When the tape ended, investigators asked, "Who said that?" Bell looked at them. He said, "Mercer." "Who ordered him to do it?" Bell said nothing. They waited. Finally, he whispered, "I told him to make the problem disappear." The room went silent. Investigators asked, "What did you mean by disappear?" Bell shook his head. "I meant the evidence." They asked, "Did you know Claire would die?" Bell closed his eyes. "No." But investigators were not convinced. They showed him the payment record, the concrete order, the surveillance photograph, the memo, the final list. Everything connected back to him. Bell finally admitted he knew Claire had been killed. He claimed he learned the next morning, but he could not explain why his company authorized the concrete burial site that same morning. He could not explain why Holloway received $15,000. He could not explain the payment to Delaney, and he could not explain Claire's note. The investigators did not need a confession. They already had the evidence. The case was now being treated as a homicide conspiracy. But because the principal suspects were dead, the legal consequences were limited. Bell's health was deteriorating. He could not be charged without a lengthy legal process, and prosecutors faced a complicated question. Could the case proceed against an 89-year-old man based primarily on decades-old evidence? The answer was uncertain. But the family did not care about the legal technicality. They wanted the truth. And they finally had it. Claire's remains were released to her family. The funeral was held 40 years after her disappearance. Only a small group attended. Family, friends, investigators, a few journalists. There was no spectacle. No cameras inside the church. Just a photograph of Claire near the altar. She was 23. Young, smiling, alive in the photograph. unaware that her life would soon become a cold case. Her brother placed the old notebook beside the photograph, the notebook that had survived, the notebook that had waited, the notebook that finally spoke. Outside, reporters waited for a statement. Claire's brother stepped forward. He held the photograph. His voice shook. He said, "She wanted someone to know what happened." Then he looked toward the cameras. Now we know. The story could have ended there. But investigators were still examining the recovered evidence. And inside the wooden box, beneath Claire's financial documents, they found one final item, a small envelope. It contained a handwritten letter addressed to her brother. Claire had never mailed it. The letter was dated November 13th, Sill, 1985, one day before she disappeared. She wrote about being afraid. She wrote about work. She wrote about the people she had trusted. And near the end, she wrote something that investigators had never seen before. "If anything happens to me, don't believe the first story they tell you." The investigators read that sentence in silence, because that was exactly what had happened. The first story had been a jealous ex-boyfriend. The second had been a voluntary disappearance. The third had been a runaway theory. All of them were wrong. The real story had been hidden behind those narratives. Claire had predicted it. She had warned them. And now, after 40 years, her warning had become reality. But there was still one unanswered question. Who had made the first call after Claire died? Investigators had assumed it was Mercer. The records suggested otherwise. At 10:43 p.m. on November 14th, Sill, 1985, a call had been made from a payphone near the quarry. The call lasted 92 seconds. The destination was not Mercer, not Holloway, not Bell. It was the police station. The call came before Claire's car was abandoned, before the official missing person report, before anyone should have known she was dead. The caller had contacted police, and the original log identified the caller only as unknown male. The detective who took the call? Frank Delaney. He wrote that the caller had provided no useful information, but investigators now knew that was almost certainly false, because the telephone recording still existed. And when forensic specialists recovered the audio, they heard a man's voice saying, 6 words, "She's dead. We need time." The voice was never identified with absolute certainty, but the timing was unmistakable. Someone knew Claire was dead before the police officially knew she was missing, and that meant the cover-up had begun almost immediately. The investigators replayed the call. 6 words. 6 words that had waited 40 years, and suddenly the entire case looked different. The first person to report the crime may have been one of the people who helped create it. The secret had not been buried when the concrete was poured. It had been buried the moment that phone call was answered, and the person on the other end of the line had known exactly what was happening. The question was no longer whether the cold case had been solved. It was how many people had known the truth from the beginning. And investigators were about to discover that the answer was larger than anyone expected. The call lasted 92 seconds. 92 seconds was all it took to change the direction of an investigation that would remain broken for 40 years. At 10:43 p.m. on November 14th, Sill, 1985, an unknown man called the police station. He did not give his name. He did not ask for an ambulance. He did not report a missing woman. He said only, "She's dead. We need time." Then the line went silent. Detective Frank Delaney took the call. He wrote almost nothing in the official record. Unknown male. No useful information. That sentence had remained in the file for decades. Now investigators knew it could not be true, because by 10:43 p.m., Claire's mother had not yet called police. The official missing person report did not exist. Her abandoned car had not been discovered. There was no public reason for anyone to know she was dead. Yet someone knew. Someone at the quarry. Someone who had access to a telephone. Someone who believed the police could be controlled. The investigators began tracing every available record connected to the payphone. The location was an old service station less than a mile from the quarry. The phone had been removed in the 1990s, but the telephone company still had billing records. The call originated there, and a second call had been made from the same location 43 minutes later. This time, the destination was David Mercer's home. The caller had remained unidentified, but investigators noticed something unusual. The phone booth stood directly beside the road leading from the quarry. Anyone leaving the property would have passed it. The investigators reconstructed the likely sequence. Claire was attacked. Someone realized she was dead. Someone left the quarry. Someone stopped at the payphone. Someone called Delaney. Then someone called Mercer, and only afterward did the vehicle begin moving. The abandoned car was discovered at 4:16 a.m. The gap between the first call and the discovery was more than 5 hours. 5 hours was enough time to move a body, enough time to clean a vehicle, enough time to scatter evidence, enough time to create a story. And that appeared to be exactly what happened. The investigators examined the original vehicle photograph. The car had been positioned carefully. It was not simply abandoned. The front wheels were turned toward the road. The driver's seat was pushed backward. The radio was tuned to a station Claire never listened to. The investigators found a small detail that had been ignored. The gas tank was nearly empty, but Claire had filled the tank earlier that afternoon. The car had been driven significantly farther than her normal route. Someone had taken it somewhere, then brought it back. That person likely knew Claire's habit. They knew she would normally drive home after dinner. They knew where police would search. They knew which roads were isolated. The staging was deliberate. The investigators compared the vehicle's mileage with the known distance between the office, the quarry, and the river. The numbers matched a possible route. The car had traveled to the quarry, then toward the river, then back toward the service road. The driver had made a loop. Why? Because the body had likely been moved separately. The car was a distraction. The investigators returned to the recovered recording. The audio captured fragments of the final confrontation, but there was another sound. A vehicle engine. Technicians isolated it. The engine note was compared with surviving recordings from vehicles owned by Mercer and Holloway. The evidence was limited, but the engine appeared consistent with Holloway's dark blue sedan. The sedan had disappeared from company records after 1987. No one knew where it went. Investigators searched old registration documents. The car had been sold in December 1985, only weeks after Claire disappeared. The buyer? A shell company. The same shell company that had paid Holloway. The vehicle had then been dismantled. The investigators tracked the part. One component had been sold to a salvage yard. A transmission. The yard's records survived. The transmission number matched Holloway's vehicle. It was destroyed in 1993. But before that, someone had written a note on the paperwork. Remove before inspection. The handwriting was unknown. The investigators compared it with Mercer's handwriting. The similarity was significant. Still not enough for a definitive conclusion, but the pattern continued. Evidence had been altered. Records had been destroyed. Vehicles had disappeared. People had been paid. And Claire's name had been pushed into obscurity. Then investigators found another witness, a former night shift mechanic named Walter Crane. He was 83. He remembered the night. He had been working at the service station near the payphone. At around 10:40 p.m., a dark sedan pulled into the lot. A man got out. He was wearing a dark jacket. His hands appeared dirty. Crane remembered the man making a call. He remembered something else. The man was not alone. Another vehicle was parked farther down the road. A police cruiser. Crane assumed it was unrelated. Now investigators showed him an old photograph of Delaney's vehicle. Crane pointed at it. "That's the car?" The investigator asked. "Are you sure?" Crane answered, "I saw it that night." Then he remembered the man who made the call. He could not identify him, but he remembered a detail. The man kept looking toward the police cruiser, as if he knew who was inside. The investigator asked whether the man appeared frightened. Crane shook his head. "No." He looked confident, like someone who knew the police would not stop him. That detail mattered, because it suggested coordination. The caller did not fear the police. He expected them to cooperate. The investigators then examined Delaney's patrol records. At 10:35 p.m., he was near the quarry. At 10:47 p.m., he was still there. At 10:51 p.m., his vehicle moved toward the service station. At 11:02 p.m., the patrol record suddenly stopped. There was no explanation. At 11:16 p.m., it resumed. Delaney claimed he had been checking a vehicle registration. No registration check existed. The records had been fabricated. That was now clear. Delaney had been at the service station. He had been near the payphone. He had received the call, and someone had likely spoken to him directly. The investigators then found an old photograph from the service station. The station owner had taken pictures for insurance purposes after a robbery in 1986. One photograph showed the payphone. The background included the road. A police cruiser was visible. The image was blurry, but the cruiser number could be read. Delaney's vehicle. The photograph was dated November 14th, Sill, 1985. The same night, the investigators had their location, their timeline, their phone call, their detective. But they still needed the person who made the call. They began examining the company's employee, who had access to the quarry, who knew the phone location, who had reason to report Claire dead. Holloway was the obvious answer, but there was another possibility, Mercer, and another, Delaney. The investigators compared voice recording, Holloway's surviving voicemail, Mercer's old business interviews, Delaney's police statements. The forensic voice analysis was careful. It could not provide absolute identification, but the unknown caller's voice showed characteristics consistent with David Mercer. That did not prove he made the call, but it increased the probability. Then investigators found a written note from Mercer. It was in an old financial file. The note was dated November 14th. The time was 10:50 p.m. It said, FD knows. The investigators stared at the initial, Frank Delaney. Mercer had known Delaney was involved, but another line was even more disturbing. Need another location? That suggested the body had not yet been moved. The first burial site may have been temporary. The concrete foundation was only the final location. The investigators believed Claire's body had been moved at least once. That explained the scattered evidence. The scarf, the bracelet, the clothing, the remains. The body had traveled, and each movement created another opportunity for mistake. One of those mistakes was the cigarette butt. Holloway had smoked near the quarry. He had dropped the cigarette. He could not have known DNA testing would eventually identify him. Another mistake was the bracelet. Claire's bracelet broke during the struggle. It ended up in the drainage chamber. Another was the scarf. It caught on vegetation. Another was the coat fabric. It became embedded in the concrete. Another was the notebook. Claire hid it. Another was the letter. She never mailed it. Another was the phone call. Someone spoke too soon. Another was the payment. The money trail survived. The killers had believed time would erase the evidence. Instead, time preserved fragments. The investigators now had enough to understand the mechanics of the cover-up, but one issue remained. The ledger. The original financial ledger was still incomplete. Claire had copied portions, but where was the complete record? If the ledger still existed, it could prove the entire operation. The investigators returned to Arthur Bell. They showed him Claire's map. They asked where the original ledger was. Bell refused to answer. They told him the financial scheme was already exposed. He said nothing. Then they asked, "Did Mercer destroy it?" Bell looked at them. "No." That single word changed everything. The ledger still existed. Bell admitted he had seen it. He said Mercer had hidden it after Claire disappeared. But where? Bell claimed he did not know. Investigators did not believe him. They searched his financial record. A storage unit appeared. It had been rented under a company name. The unit was located in Delaware. The rental began in January 1986. It remained active until 2004. Then it was closed. The contents were transferred. To where? The company that handled the transfer no longer existed. Investigators traced the former manager. He was dead. But his son remembered something. A group of old boxes had been stored in a barn. The boxes had belonged to Arthur Bell. The investigators searched the barn. Most were empty. Then they found a metal box beneath a wooden floorboard. Inside was a ledger. Black cover. Hundreds of pages. The dates began in 1979. The final entries were from 1986. The investigators opened the book. Names. Payments. Codes. Initials. Amounts. And on one page, dated November 15th, Sill 1985, was an entry, CB closed. Beside it, RH 15, FD 5, DIM expenses. And beneath those entries was one final notation, AB approved. Arthur Bell. The ledger was authentic. The handwriting matched company records. The financial numbers matched bank statements. The payments matched the deposits. The system had been documented. The murder had been documented. Not in words, not as a confession, but in numbers. A coded payment. A dead woman. A police detective. A security guard. A financial manager. And a company executive. The investigators had finally found the document Claire had been trying to expose. The ledger was the missing link. It showed the money moved immediately after her disappearance. It showed who received it, and it showed who approved it. The cold case was now supported by physical evidence, DNA, audio, financial records, witness testimony, and forensic reconstruction. Yet the investigators still needed to know one thing. What happened to the original murder weapon? The forensic examination of Claire's remains suggested a heavy object, something solid, something capable of causing the fracture. The quarry had contained construction equipment, hammers, metal pipes, tools. Investigators searched old equipment inventory. One item was missing, a steel construction bar. The inventory listed it as damaged. The date? November 15th, Sill 1985. The item was never recovered, but investigators found a photograph of Mercer standing near a truck. In the truck bed was the missing steel ball. The photograph had been taken that same month. It was not enough to prove it was the weapon, but it was another piece, another connection, another silent witness. The investigators placed everything on a timeline. Claire discovers fraud. Claire begins collecting evidence. Claire becomes frightened. Holloway watches her. Delaney receives information. Mercer confronts her. Claire records the conversation. The quarry meeting occurs. The attack begins. The body is moved. The phone call is made. The car is staged. The concrete is poured. The money is distributed. The investigation is redirected. Morgan becomes the suspect. The evidence disappears. 40 years pass. Then DNA speaks. The case that had once seemed impossible was now almost completely reconstructed. But one final question remained. Why had Arthur Bell kept the ledger for 40 years? Why not destroy it? Why keep the document that could expose everything? The investigators finally understood. Bell had not kept it because he was careless. He had kept it because the ledger protected him. It contained evidence against everyone, including himself. As long as the ledger remained hidden, no one could easily accuse anyone without exposing the entire network. It was a shield, a weapon, a secret insurance policy, and now it had become the evidence that destroyed the secret. When investigators confronted Bell with the ledger, he finally admitted that he had kept it because he feared the others. He feared Mercer. He feared Holloway. He feared Delaney. And he feared what would happen if anyone talked. Then investigators asked, "Did Claire know where the ledger was?" Bell answered, "She was looking for it." That explained everything. Claire had been close. Too close. She had discovered the money. She was searching for the original ledger, and someone realized that if she found it, the entire network would collapse. The investigators closed the case file late that night. On the final page, they wrote, "Claire Bennett, homicide, solved." But the word solved could not erase 40 years. It could not return Claire. It could not restore the years her family lost. It could not repair James Morgan's ruined reputation. And it could not undo the failures that allowed the truth to remain buried. The evidence had survived. The people had not. And perhaps that was the most disturbing lesson of all. The men who knew what happened were gone, but the secret remained, waiting. Until one forgotten cigarette butt, one hidden ledger, one damaged recording, and one buried grave finally spoke at the same time. The cold case was solved. But the story was not finished. Because when investigators compared the names in the ledger with Claire's handwritten list, they found something that made them stop. There was a fifth name, a name Claire had never written in the notebook, a name that appeared only in the ledger. And unlike Bell, Mercer, Holloway, and Delaney, this person had not died. He was still alive, and he had been living under the same name for 40 years.